Many people mistakenly believe that Weathering with You is all about climate change. While the movie's central message does revolve around climate change, it has another narrative that's woven into the movie. But by only focusing on climate change in specific, you miss out on the bigger picture. This movie has way more depth than many people realize, and I wanted to highlight some specific themes about the movie today. I specifically wanted to look at how change affects people's lives and how accepting change is an important part of life. Today, we'll be looking at the real meaning of Weathering with You. By the way, there will be spoilers for Weathering with You. I'm assuming that everyone's already seen this movie at this point if you're on this video, but if you haven't, please watch that and come back to this video. Now let's get started with the video. Before we dive into the meaning of the movie, I figured you need a refresher on the plot of Weathering with You. A young boy named Hodaka moves to Tokyo because he's bored with life in his hometown. He struggles to find work initially because he's a runaway, but he finds work with a shady magazine company. Japan is well known for its rainy season, especially in June, but this new weather is extreme compared to the past. Sunshine is a rarity in this depiction of Tokyo. At this point, many people are getting sick of all the rain, and they will pay any price to get rid of it, even for a few short minutes. Then comes in Hina, a girl who is capable of controlling the weather and can make it sunny on the drop of a hat. She becomes very popular for her ability, and she is rewarded very handsomely for it, making enough for her, her brother, and Hodaka. Hina enjoys her line of work at first, but then the tolls of her actions come back to her. The big twist is that when she uses her power, she loses part of her body. She's eventually spirited away from the world, forced to suffer alone as a sacrifice for good weather. Fortunately, Hodaka is able to save her, but when she returns, the weather goes back to being crazy and Tokyo floods over. We see people in the movie cope with these new changes. Rather than using trains in the city, they use a system of ferries that run where the old trains used to be. The people adapted to their new environment because there was no other choice but to adapt. One key fact that the movie reminds us is that modern Tokyo used to be underwater a couple hundred years ago. This is true, as much of metropolitan Tokyo lies below sea level and is very prone to flooding during typhoons or the rainy season. Shinkai is trying to warn the people of Tokyo that their city and their way of life isn't as permanent as they think it is. While the flooding of Tokyo won't be as sudden as shown in the movie, eventually Tokyo will flood over, and the people will have to adapt to the changing climate. While the people of Tokyo eventually come to accept the new weather patterns, they initially try to fight the new change rather than accepting it. They realize that the weather is changing and that it probably won't go back to normal for a very long time. But rather than accepting that the rain will continue, the people of Tokyo will all try to push it off. They use Hina's powers to get temporary satisfaction rather than adapting to the new patterns of life. May I remind you, they are willing to use and eventually sacrifice a young girl to bring back something as trivial as sunny weather. The people are effectively trying to bargain with fate itself, but little do they know, they are using bot time. Because she used her powers too much, Hina disappears and they have no idea where she would go. Normally, the sun will be used as a positive thing in the movie, to symbol that something has happened that's super good. But the sun is shown to weigh down on Hodaka. This inspires him to save Hina, no matter the cost. And when he rescues her, he says the most powerful line in the whole movie. He accepts that Tokyo probably will be rainy for decades to come, but he wants to save Hina so much that he's willing to trade good weather for her. Hina was mostly selfless in her desire to help people. Sure, she did make money from her ability, but she was using that money to provide for her little brother. Most people didn't need the sun to survive, however, it was just a pleasure. Hodaka realizes that Hina is ultimately being sacrificed for the good of the city, but he refuses to allow Hina, his best friend, to be sacrificed to make selfish people happy. This is ultimately used as a metaphor for how our comfortable lives are being subsidized by future generations, who will have to deal with the negative impacts of climate change. Shinkai's ultimate message about climate change is that people need to put their differences aside and work together to complete a common goal to minimize such a catastrophe. If we all make little changes in our lives to help solve climate change, we may not need a drastic change in life as shown in the movie. This film is telling the audience to advocate for climate reform and look for more efficient ways to power their lives. The thing though is that people need to sacrifice a bit to make sure that children can live in a future without the fear of climate change. While this is a lot easier said than done, we should continue to look for ways to curb climate change. While Weathering with You's messages ultimately revolve around climate change, its themes can also apply to many more things about life. During the coronavirus pandemic, many people refused to wear masks or social distance. They ultimately refused to change their lives or habits because of the pandemic. Many of these same people would then get sick with COVID and then give their families, friends, or even get strangers sick. Ultimately, this culminated in the US having one of the highest death per capita rates in the developed world. This is extremely frustrating for me, because if people just wore masks and local governments continued to enforce procedures for the pandemic, hundreds of thousands of lives could have been saved. But because of a lack of change, this world has lost so much. People should have accepted the change and tried to live with it, rather than outright rejecting it and accidentally killing tens of thousands of people. While we can't save those who have died, we should continue to wear masks and social distance until the threat is over. Sometimes I wonder what the characters would do if they had a coronavirus outbreak in their world, but I digress. While Weathering With You does focus heavily on climate change, the movie is much more about change in general. The movie understands that change is normal and that people should expect change in their lives. This theme is certainly interesting, because I believe it's one of the more forgotten parts about life in the modern world. Everything about our lives in the developed world is so stable. We can't really imagine it going away soon. We must come to accept that change is the only constant in our universe, and we should learn to embrace these changes rather than outright rejecting them. Overall, Weathering With You is just an incredible movie. The animation in it is stunning, the story is very solid, and the message is very relatable. I really hope that this movie inspires some people to help fight the negative effects of climate change, but I also want people to understand that this movie is far more deep than that. It handles the complicated topic of change very well, and it's certainly far more complicated than people make it out to be. If you haven't seen it, then please check it out. It's definitely worth a watch. Thanks for watching my YouTube video. If you enjoyed my content, give me a like. And if you'd like to see future content, click the subscribe button, hit the bell icon to hear when new content releases. And if you'd like to hear my rants or production notifications, check out my Twitter. Thank you. See you guys next time.